Have you ever been in a situation where you were eager to get to a goal or destination, but the process was taking slower than you desired? Were you patient to wait out the process? Or did you try to speed it up on your own? We live in an instant generation where it is easy to get results at a snap of a finger. Hungry? Just eat instant noodles. No time to finish watching your favorite Korean drama? Simply put it on 2x speed. This idea of impatience and wanting things to get done on our own time is not a new phenomenon caused by being spoiled by the advancement of technology. In fact, the children of Israel were plagued by this too. While Moses was up on the mountain with God, receiving the terms of the marriage covenant, they began to perceive that he had delayed or was taking too long to come down from the mountain, and as a result decided that they should call the shots to get things going. Turning to the second in command, Aaron, they said, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." The sudden disappearance of their leader had put them on edge, and they were unwilling to wait. They could not see or trust that this delay was a part of God's wonderful purpose, and decided to create a god on their own terms. And wavering under their demands, Aaron fashioned a golden calf using the gold from the Israelites. Gold that was meant to be used for the building of the tabernacle. Then he built an altar before it so that the Israelites could worship this golden calf. This is a heartbreaking message the Israelites were sending to God. Essentially, they were saying, "We want to get to the promised land more than we want your presence with us to get there." It's easy to read the story and shake your head at the Israelites for their fickle affections, but we are not very far off from them. Have you ever found yourself disliking the waiting process that God has been putting you through, so much so that you decide to go ahead and make things happen on your own? Maybe it's in looking for the right job, the right house, the right marriage partner. I know I've been guilty of this way too often. God promises us great blessings because He is such a great Father, but we miss out on these promises if we are not willing to wait for Him to move on His own timing. Worse yet, we could put our trust in someone or something else to affirm what we need, thus creating a God on our own terms, an idol. Now, fully knowing what had taken place on the ground, God commanded Moses to go down to the people. "Behold," he said, "I have seen these people, and indeed, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you." This was a severe statement, and rightfully so, coming from a perfect and holy God who had created all things, including the very people who were now sinning against Him. It is right for God to have wanted to consume these stiff-necked ones and start anew through Moses. Would it be the story of Noah yet again? Moses would not have it. As right as God was to want to destroy these people, Moses decided to petition for their lives. "O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, 'With evil intent did he bring them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth'? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, 'I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit forever.'" This is the characteristic of an intercessor, a friend of God who, knowing that he could mediate between God and man, came before God and reminded Him of His promises towards His people. Not only that, Moses also reminded God of his reputation before the other nations. Here we get an indication of what it looks like to intercede on behalf of a people before God. Did you know that you and I get to do it too? In the previous video, I had mentioned that we are a royal priesthood unto God. As a kingdom of priests before Him, this is the privilege we get, to petition on behalf of many souls, reminding God of His promises and His namesake. Oh wow, Suen, how can a human being like you and I remind God of things and change His mind? We may be weak and broken in our frame, yet this is what we were made for, what dignity God gives us. And we can see this clearly by what happened after Moses contended for the people. The Lord relented, and no fatal disaster was brought upon his people. However, this did not mean that there were no consequences for the Israelites. We would learn further on that a death penalty awaited those who had been in the act of sin against God, and 3,000 men were put to death. The Lord also caused a plague to come upon the people thanks to their sin. Yet, this is mercy. They could have been completely removed from the face of the earth if not for the intercession of their leader Moses. Now, God not only gives us the dignity of being priests and intermediaries, He is also a God who seeks a friend in His people and is willing to listen to them. All throughout chapter 33, we see glimpses of God's interaction with Moses. In verse 11, we understand that the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man who speaks to his friend. Moses was a friend of God, and thus the relationship between them allowed for Moses to stand before him and make requests. What would a friend of God be characterized by? Well, faith and obedience were most definitely the key indicators, as we would have seen Moses displaying over the span of this entire book. However, another important indicator was the fact that Moses knew God's heart. He was able to plead with God in accordance with God's desires. As I had mentioned earlier, Moses had reminded God of his promises as well as his reputation among the nations. Moses also knew that God desires to dwell among his people, and so he pleaded for God's presence to continue to be with them. I absolutely love what Moses says in verses 15 and 16. If your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? Later on, he would ask God to show him his glory. Wow, talk about tugging at the heartstrings of the Almighty God. Because of this, God commanded Moses and the Israelites to continue the work of building the tabernacle and ordaining the priests. He would allow his presence to dwell among the children of Israel after all, and the tabernacle and priesthood were required to ensure the pardoning of sins of the people before God in order for this dwelling and fellowship to continue. And as we draw to the close of the book of Exodus, we see Moses finally finishing the work that God had commanded him to do. With that, the glory of God entered into the tabernacle, filling it as a great cloud, so much so that even Moses himself couldn't enter it. However, this was a glorious picture. God was satisfied with this dwelling place in the midst of his people as he had always desired. There is much to take away from this action-packed book, and I hope you have enjoyed the journey as much as I have. When we first started, I had mentioned that Exodus was a book about a God delivering a people from a life of oppression, not just physically, but also spiritually. As we conclude, let's reflect on that again and think about how the story reminds us of ourselves. We too were once who were slaves to the life of sin and bondage under the prince of this world, Satan. However, Jesus, the greater Moses, as well as the perfect Lamb, delivered us out of that life and into a new one where we could enjoy an intimate relationship with him and take on an identity of becoming a kingdom of priests. Just as the law was written on the stone tablets then, he has now written the law on the tablets of our hearts that we might know and follow it. And if we would be willing and cooperative to his leadership, his Spirit will continue to sanctify us as we journey through the wilderness until we are perfected in that day of glory with him in the promised land. The wilderness journey can be filled with trials and testing today. And it is easy to want to give up and go back to Egypt, but may I encourage you with a beautiful verse from the Song of Solomon. Who's that coming out of the wilderness leaning on her beloved? The God who began a good work in you will carry into completion that you will be victorious in love at the end of it all. Would you lean in and acknowledge that he dwells in the tabernacle of your heart, giving him full worship as you take each step in life?